Dear friends, good morning. Please take seats. Take seats, please. It is we're very. Please do take seats, please. All the advisors. It is our pleasure today to have a special session that will allow us to have a discussion between the former President of the Republic and Jean Viard, whom I like. Good morning, President. Good morning. So I'll link up with yesterday because we're still discussing progress. So what did we say yesterday? We said the culture of progress is the culture that was built after the French Revolution, after the Industrial Revolution, because before that we were just expecting the return of the Son of God, and those were not societies of progress, they were societies of expectation. And then we built this dream of progress, which was the heart of political struggle. And then in the popular classes, people were expecting progress, here, central heating, toilets in the flat, cars, kids going to university. It was like progress for myself. Then what happened is that slowly today, most people would rather look at the past. 73% of people say it was better yesterday, and most people today would vote for a side, political sides, which will ask for a past, even colonization for some of them, whatever, or before the revolutionary model. So this is where we stand, and the major problem today is that democratic times replaced the idea of progress by a vision of future. A lady said she had a desire of future. So not necessarily left, how the democratic side can give a meaning in a world which is impacted by three revolutions. Nature makes history. So what is it to be a politician if you have to run after heat waves? For at least 2 generations. So we can fight for the third generation that will be, and then we can struggle to know if are happy with the world of today. But it's not for us to decide. So what is politics? This is a difficult question. Second topic, it's patriarchate. That is and I'm not talking about domination, the man-women relationship, man is Eric, and the lady was supposed to hold the house, and the man was with the warrior, and women have more autonomy, are doing great in their studies, they're progressing in society, and so the evolution of AI. And AI, nobody knows where we're going, but it is an amazing power. Here in Aix, when the train came, the train is not good, they're happy with that. So those who refuse theological rupture are those who actually are left on the side of the road of history. So these three revolutions do not make sense. It is not conveyed by politicians. So how can we give a meaning back to these societies and to say, okay, maybe not the word of progress. I don't know if we're going to go back to progress, but we need to find a term that will replace that. And what will be the philosophy of the future in which we will raise our kids? First of all, thank you for your introduction. Congratulations for the action of the sex economy. So we are discussing progress at a time when people doubt about the very idea that the coming generation will have a better life than the current generation. The world progress is part of, enters the political discourse at the end of the 19th century, once the Republic had been proclaimed, but also translated into fundamental laws, and at a time when the Industrial Revolution started having its effects, and the need for justice without disrupting the productive mode was defined through the notion of progress. The notion of progress is coming back following two global disasters in the 20th century, because there can be no progress if there is no peace. And therefore, the entire political construction of post-war period was done around the idea not only that there would be access to goods, that there would be social justice, that is national health system, welfare system, and the ability for each and every one to have a life that can be, could be safe alone, and this is individualism and consumption. What did break, So what broke down in the main crisis of the 70s and again in the 80s or 90s? Well, progress is was no longer linear. There was a time of rupture, that individuals themselves can no longer fulfill their own fate alone, and they doubt politicians in their functions. So today there is a paradoxical situation. There's never been so many acceleration of scientific and technical progress, never. And I'm not talking about just AI, I'm talking about digital, major scientific ruptures. Never was science and technology yielding so many tangible results, including in our ways of life. It goes well beyond the material goods or consumers' goods that we would consume in the 60s, 80s. Science, has never been so good for our health. There's never been so much access to knowledge for some of our citizens, yet there's never been so much worries about the future, just as if this huge amount of science and technological ruptures were sources of worries, and not just sources of progress, investigation, investment, or consumptions. Therefore, what happens when there is progresses, and worries, and justified climate, war, and so on and so forth, that even science makes us worried because it cannot solve all the problems like climate change mitigation. It creates new weapons as well, which will cause massive destruction. We've seen enough of that, especially in Ukraine. And it will also change the modes of use. So when there is this bundle of progresses, of breakthroughs and high worries, the political world should act. And this is where, in all democracies, there is a crisis of the political world. That is, versus these changes taking place everywhere, at every scale, the methods, recommendations, orientations are no longer valid. And this is where populists entered with, in an easier way than in the past, not to promise a revolution, a rupture of the world, but simply to the appropriation by the people of its own fear and of a demand for individual or collective or nationalist protection. Protection is no longer collective, social, shared. It is now privatized or nationalized with strong power. In those periods, we need politicians because, well, all those who belong to democracy should have a better control over fate. So there should be an orientation, method to go in that direction long term, and politicians who commit themselves to say that they can control our collective fate. One of the problems is for that we need organizations, political parties, democratic life, and in most democracies, these organizations became weaker and the loss of sense. But I think we are in a society of individuals who have discontinuous lives, who have professional, sentimental stories. You will not reshape social classes on which the parties relied. You know, there was parties had a narrative, on the left and right, but not the same distribution of the fruit of progress. With society of individuals, of freedom and risk. So politics can no longer be the same. I hear what you're saying, but the central question is that of the construction of a story, of a narrative. People are not just attached to material aspects. How the world can evolve, they want to know, and how men will. In no countries of the world can have this story. Extreme right and extreme left, all existed because usually they're left aside because the democratic world have long-term perspective for their children, and short-term for their private lives, and if they with concrete ideas, because the collapse of birth rate is associated also with other factors, but also the lack of trust, confidence in the future. So, well, some women do not make children, and other women make children. So it's there is 39% of students who say they will never have a child. I'm not saying they won't, but anyway, that exists, and it seems to me that the politicians did not reconsider themselves. The left-right separation is now a joke, and the two parties, which were the minority, fascism is always present, extreme left as well. But it's present here on the on the side, and sometimes even in France. It was created in '74. We barely talked about it. So clearly, it is the weakness of the so-called Democrats that is the cause, and. We could do the 1945 contract between generations, because we went from a 3-4 generation society, and we could say that we did not reorganize anything. And young people, say we are not ready to work longer. And I said, but why? Why don't you want to ask to work 2 years longer? And pensioners will, but there must be a societal. A contract of society. Well, demography in all countries of the world except Africa, the birth rate or demography is declining. There is not, except Africa, there is no country except Africa which does not go through this, which means that societies think that with less children, we can give them more than in the past. But there is also a doubt, but it applies to countries which are undergoing development, like China, or let's take the example of Korea, where they probably have no children. So clearly, there is the idea that a child becomes rare because we have to give him everything we did not necessarily receive in our generation. In France, it was. This took a while before it started in the early 2015, so that there would be a real drop in birth rate. And today, we have all the projections that lead us to think that the natural, balance, death will cancel itself. Well, there will be issues of labor, what we do with the situation. But so why is there this trend, and how are we going to go with this trend? So let me get to my conclusion. Progress is not is to age gracefully. It's not just to know at when we're going to take go to retirement. It's not just to know when in a life will be there will be a welfare system. The true progress is when the coming generation has all the conditions to succeed, not just for itself, but for the country. So what do we do? What do we do? We're in a country where, birth rate is declining. So although we have a large young population. So if we look at the election statistics, a lot of candidates look at this and they will look at the statistics and say, okay, well, it's simple to have a program. We have to do it for people who are over 50 because the people over 50 are in majority. And I think the opposite. I think that today, the political program, if we want to give a meaning, an orientation and trust, should be on the generation that doesn't vote, 0 to 18, and the next generation, 18 to 35. So how do we do that? Well, the efforts we'll have to do, despite all the budgetary constraints, and that the demography will release because there will be less children in schools and less students because of demography. All the efforts should be dedicated to education, training, insertion, skilling, reskilling of the coming generation. Countries that will do best, and France can be there, are countries where there is an ability for the coming generation to innovate, to invest, and to work hard, and to imagine a possible future, including in ruptures vis-à-vis our ways of life today, for example, including the climate. So what is at stake is to talk to the whole society. We want to talk to everybody, giving a priority which is not necessarily that of the largest number, but that's the one that will enable all generations to understand the orientations and the meaning of a country. This is why there are two priorities, in my opinion, for France. Youth, that is from children, and you can see that the problem of childhood is not present in the recent violence, which have been in the current situation where we've seen. And the second priority is science. The science, as I said, is changing. The main battle is that who will be the most innovative, who will be invent most, and who will master science. In that respect, France has some, assets, but the battle, and the US and China got that. It's a European battle. It's science, knowledge, it's discovery, innovation, and this mobilizes the nation. When a nation starts talking about science, innovation, discoveries, and therefore health care, and the youth, it becomes more confident in the future. It's not that some of you wants to go back to the past. It's impossible anyway. So it's an upper fallacy. We know that you don't go back to the past. It's a shame. Well, whatever. This is a false, but when people come and say to you, I'll make you younger, well, you got some knowledge to say that fate is something that you can't control. So the risk is not the past, is that the present of the future will mixed with the present, and there is no future. And future is so scary that I cling to the present and I want to move. So if you open a perspective for the future, if we let people think that there is a direction, and as soon as there is long term, then there will be trust. Let me finish on this, because in fact, politics, and I've known it, is always urgency. You're elected president, you got a program, but then you're always caught up by, there are always situations, whatever aspect, there is always something more urgent than your program. Since we are in short mandates, well, the urgency invades your life and the anticipation and everything. So today, the president for the coming 5 years, of course, he will have to deal with similar situations. But what that president will have to assume is to be the president of a transition, to say that he will do what he has to do, not for now, just now, he will have to accept the fact that it will be just now, but to make a transition, demographic transition, and technology, digital, and even democratic transition, because we're going to shift from one system to another one, from bipolar system, left-right, to we have a new system, extreme left, extreme right, and a new political system of global management of the future.
I don't know if you know Pavel. I even published his program in Czech, and I offered thousands of books to support him. And he said that communism has collapsed, and the West has not understood what this collapse means. It's like anarchy of the 17th century. The politics are structured by pairs that defend themselves, and when they say the West will collapse, well, why did we collapse? It's because they thought that they'd won, with the Americans and their discourse. And this is when we started to fail to reconstruct, because people were not listening to him. And I think that he had a very interesting position. These are the main challenges of today. Did you know Favino? Yes, I met him. I didn't know him very well. He was no longer the president when I was president. Yes, I know it was afterwards. I wanted to say this because since that time, for me, that's where the political crisis began, because what is the new stake? Because the stake around nature, we can clearly see the climate war. Of course, they'll say forests, and there are those that say we never do enough, and there are others that will say we can't do anything more. The game is to say, no, if we can do things with the COP21, we move ahead faster, etc. But we're all stakeholders. There is no judge, so you're in one camp or another. So it's very difficult to manage. And for AI, I think we're underlining too much the technical part. I like Audrey Tang, the Minister of Taiwan, who says that the three main skills to have is curiosity, civic engagement, etc. So it's a reconstruction of value systems. So you have to have the curiosity of a new world, how we will work together, and how we take into account the effects of AI on jobs, etc. It's not enough to say, yes, I'm going to get rid of jobs, okay. The guy has 1,000 billion. What does that mean? So that's the situation we're in. And how do we move ahead in order to really take on board AI in a philosophical point of view and not? So first of all, what always struck me in countries that were communist in the past and had the idea of joining the European Union is the tremendous dynamics that these countries saw in the post-communist era. And their project was to join the European Union. And once they joined the European Union, they were disappointed. They said, oh, is that what Europe is? That's all? And so they benefited from markets and structural funds, although they are the major beneficiaries. And there are no longer any projects other than the development itself of the country in question, with nationalism coming back, as we see everywhere in Eastern Europe, in the Balkans or elsewhere. But for Western Europeans, the reunification was not a project. It was a political project, if you want, for the leaders to say, well, we've won against communism, the continent is all back together, and it is time for peace. But peace is not a project. Peace is a requirement. Peace is a value, but it's not a project. And so Europe lost a great deal of attractiveness. And for many, and even France, the problem is that, there's no longer a narrative that says France will be the biggest country in the world. But what people were saying was that Europe is like a big France, a large-scale France. So we wanted to commit to this European engagement. So we will create Europe so that France is more powerful. Yes, but we're not alone in Europe, and there are 26 other countries that are not necessarily easy to move. I will not quote any names or countries, but that's the way it is. But here I find, in this difficult threatened world, there is a positive point. Donald Trump is the biggest fighter for the European for the question of Europe. If we doubted that Europe had to be forged, not just the Europe of currency and free trade, but Europe as it was imagined, including by de Gaulle and Eisenhower, Europe which is to be a power. And the close nationalism narrow nationalism cannot work. The difficulty for the radical political parties is that how can you be against Europe? It's very difficult today. Not long ago, declarations of Le Pen and Mélenchon were published after Brexit, and they said, yes, they've found the pathway. That's what we need to do. But that's over now. Neither of them say that anymore. Because Europe, although the French don't always have a very positive attitude towards Europe, now they know that this is the condition for power, on condition that France does not disappear. So, second comment on AI. The more AI there will be, and we will see with its positive and negative impacts, the more the human dimension will appear, meaning that the big question is, do we take AI and take it for ourselves as users and victims, or do we reposition human beings at the center of everything? So I place that bet. The more technology there is, the more the citizens must create human relations between everybody. Humanization, not just to use intelligence, but personal human relations. And I've often mentioned this figure. Solitude, isolation are in all contemporary societies today. There was a statistic, only Americans can produce this type of statistic, but they looked at who had voted for Donald Trump, and they discovered that it was the people who used to have dinner alone every evening. They were the people who were voting for Donald Trump. So that was a correlation. You always have to be cautious with regard to correlations. But there's something that's true. The more alone you are, including with social media, including with artificial intelligence, the fewer human relationships you have, the more you are carried by the democratic idea and the idea of a projection. So a policy is to put the spotlight on human relations. The teachers must spend more time with the pupils. The carers must spend more time with the patients. And, the postmen and women must have close relationships with the people they serve. So, in COVID, the problem was not with the people who went to the hospitals, but those that stayed at home and died alone. Well, I'm being told that we have to wrap up. I wanted to ask you a last question, President. Before, the left wing had nationalization on one side, like the ones in the 80s, and you also said that the enemy was finance. And on the other hand, we had ultra-liberalism. But what we see now is a reflection on the foundations as a major economic player. I was with the meeting of the foundations last year, and even Donald Trump is saying this. So why? Because when you have in a society where people have 1,000 billion, the model of regulation through economic policies cannot be resumed at the drop of a hat. So there are 9,000 billion that will be handed down from one generation to the next. I think you're a little bit younger than me, but we're more or less the same generation. So with regard to this transmission, there are 9,000 billion that will be passed on. So is the idea of creating large foundations that build capital and which are private players, but that are collectively managed side by side with the big capital holders, is this a possible avenue for the transformation and to allow people to have, cope with the fact that there are people who are so much richer than everybody. So first of all, there's this fantasy about people who have 9,000 billion and saying that this heritage will be passed on because the people are getting older, but not everybody benefits from the same heritage. So we have figures that aggregate very different situations. You can't ask somebody who has a small house that wants to pass this on before they die or once they've passed away. And you can't ask them to turn to a foundation to do this. So this question does affect the very big fortunes of this world. And there are an increasing number of foundations. I myself preside at a foundation. There is an increasing amount of participation. Therefore, I'm quite in favour of this. And I saw that the Prime Minister also wants to tax money that is given to foundations. Why not? There's already a fiscal system. I'm not sure that he can get this adopted at Parliament in this autumn, but why not? But everything that can be given to the foundations for the good of all is heading in the right direction. But we can't let people think that the world of foundations will replace the world of organization and redistribution. That is just one element, but it cannot be a substitution. The United States might be engaged in the spirit because they do not have redistribution mechanisms. So I'm quite favorable for these transfers to take place. But the best policy for the transfer of heritage is not to give it to your children, but to the grandchildren. That is the real stake, so that it can be done for coming generations. Because the price of housing, if we look at very concrete information, the price of accommodation has become so high in recent years. So we say, what is progress? Progress for a long time was to have own your own home. But today, be it in the rental market or in full ownership, in big cities, or even in medium-sized cities or the countryside, housing is a problem. So we have to transfer heritage to the younger people so they can buy or that they get going in life with an initial capital. Thank you, President. We're being told to stop now. So you ended on a very positive project. That's good. Thank you very much.